Hello Horizons, my name is Malik and I'm going to show you how to play chess. I've got special pieces that shows you how many spaces you can move at once and in which directions. Now here you have your pawn. Now the pawn can move up to 2 spaces but only on the first move. So you can either move 1 space or 2 spaces. But once you move 2 spaces on your first move, you can't do it again. If you move 1 space on your first move, you can't move 2 spaces with this specific pawn anymore. Now it shows with the arrow that it can only move forward, but the diagonal arrow shows that it can go diagonal. But that's only if it's attacking. So let's say we have another pawn right here. This pawn has to attack this way. The pawn cannot attack forward, only diagonal. Now the rook here can move from 1 to 7 spaces. So you can either go up and down or left to right. As long as the path is clear. Now knights are a bit tricky. You have to move 3 spaces at a time. But you can either go up 1 and over 2 or up 2 and over 1. And you can do that in either direction. Bishops also move 1 to 7 spaces, but they go diagonal. So you can either go this way or that way. Now here we have the king. This is the one you got to watch out most for because this is what you're protecting your opponents from. Now the king can only move 1 at a time, but it can be in any direction. So you can either go left, right, up, and down. Now the queen is probably the best piece on the board. It can move 1 to 7 spaces and in any direction. So you can go up and down, left to right, and diagonal, moving as many spaces as you want. The rook here can move 1 to 7 spaces, but it can only go left to right and up and down. So let's say this pawn moves up 2 spaces, can no longer move 2 spaces again, and let's say this pawn moves up 1 space. Now this pawn also can no longer use 2 spaces. Even if you don't do it in the beginning, you can no longer use 2 spaces. This is stuck using 1 move. Now let's say that from the beginning that this pawn moves up 2 spaces and this pawn moves up 2 spaces. See, now this pawn, if it wants to take the chance, can jump this pawn, and now this piece is out. Like I said before, the pawn can only attack diagonally. The knights here, the knights are the only piece that can go over other pieces. So let's say that we're going to have this piece out here. So that way it would be this guy's turn, and this piece will move out here. Now, the pawn can go over this piece, and it can jump to another. And now this piece would be out. Like I said, the knight can only move 3 spaces. So, like I demonstrated, it went over 1 and up 2. So now we have the bishop. Like I mentioned before, this piece goes diagonal. So let's say we have this piece come up here. Now this piece, this bishop, can now attack this pawn. And now this pawn is out. Now since pawns can only attack diagonally, if 2 pawns come together like this, they are stuck. But since there is another pawn across from him, or it doesn't matter which piece is across, now the pawn can get out of the situation and attack. See, now the pawn is free. But if these 2 are alone and none of these pieces were there, these 2 pieces would be stuck until it has an opponent to attack. Let's say that this pawn has now gotten a black piece out. Now the rook here can come and take this piece as the rook moves up and down and left to right. These 2 pawns are right here. Now the queen can get both of these people, but you can only attack one person. So you can either attack this pawn, or you can go diagonal and attack this pawn. Now if there was pawns over here, you could also move left or right to attack those pawns. I apologize if some of the instructions were unclear, but this is a very difficult game, but once you start playing and learning as you go along, it gets easier every time and it will become more fun. Thanks for watching.